working with my old colleagues. Obviously, I spent 10 years in this body and know these gentlemen and ladies very well, and we are excited about our agendas and how well they match up together. And I'm just here to show my support of this body, and it's been great working with the majority leader Steve Gooch and the pro tem John Kennedy, two gentlemen I've known for a very long time, have had a great working relationship with. So at this time, I'd like to call on the pro tem John Kennedy.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. I am delighted to be before you, and I first want to thank Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones for your leadership. Thank you for your friendship, your 10 years of service in the Senate, and the trusted hand that he brings to the Lieutenant Governor's office. We are the beneficiary of, and this entire caucus and our entire Senate chamber is enjoying what Lieutenant Governor Jones is bringing to us in the form of his leadership. It is my distinct pleasure to stand before you along with my Republican colleagues, who I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. I'm John Kennedy from the 18th District. I represent some counties in Middle Georgia around the Macon area, but also have the distinct pleasure of serving as the President Pro Tem of the Senate body. I want to introduce your Georgia's Senate Republican caucus leadership, and starting, as the Lieutenant Governor said, our Majority Leader, Steve Gooch. I also want to introduce our Majority Caucus Chair, Senator Jason Anavatarte. Our Majority Caucus Whip, Randy Robertson, right here, Senator Robertson. Our Majority Caucus Secretary, Larry Walker. And who did I miss? I missed somebody. How about our Vice Chair? Where's Senator Brass? Right here, our Majority Caucus Vice Chairman. You know, this team, along with the caucus that backs us up, is here today, and we're ready to tackle some of the strongest challenges that Georgia faces, just as we have done in the past and up until this point. But we can't do it alone. It is our Majority Caucus Chair, along with the leadership and the Lieutenant Governor, and we're excited about working with the House, in particular, new Speaker Burns and his leadership team that the House has chosen. And I certainly it would be remiss for me not to talk about us being excited of working for 4 more years with our great Governor Brian Kemp and the leadership that he's exhibited for the last 4 years and taking Georgia through some very difficult times. And we now have some interesting and new opportunities, many of which are great opportunities, and we're looking forward to his leadership as he continues to lead from the governor's office, and we will be working with him. He's mentioned several initiatives that he's interested in. You're going to hear more of that from our majority leader. But I just want you to know that, generally speaking, you know, we're looking at and interested at growing the economic opportunity for Georgians across the state. We want to build a strong workforce to make sure that that effort is supported, and to ensure that Georgia is a safe and healthy place for all of us to work, for our families and our children and our future. So it's my pleasure to introduce now our Majority Leader. Steve Gooch is a fine man. He's worked in the Senate for many years with a demonstrated great ability to pass legislation. He hails from the mountains of North Georgia. He's a fantastic leader. He's going to tell you about our priorities that we're going to pursue this year, and I'm happy to introduce Senator Steve Gooch, our Majority Leader.
You can applaud. I heard it. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Jones. We appreciate those kind words, and we look forward to working with you and your administration, along with new Speaker Burns as well. And Pro Tem Kennedy, you and I have been friends for the 12 years I've been down here, and you've been here almost that long, and we've developed a strong friendship and working relationship along with my other colleagues behind us. I want to thank the senators that are here today, that are standing behind me. We come together to show unity and common purpose in the operations of the state Senate. Through years of hard work and tough decisions, we certainly have our state on the right track. And so much of this session will be focused on building upon the foundation of those successes over the past few years. With the newly reelected Governor Brian Kemp and his soaring approval ratings, and new leadership teams in both the House and the Senate chambers, there is no doubt that this is going to be shaping up to be an exciting legislative session full of promise. The nonstop reporting of new job announcements and the overflowing state coffers speaks to the abundance of our great state. But as we move forward in our stewardship of those resources, it is important to remember the type of teamwork, leadership, and the prioritization that got us here today. As the majority leader, it's my job to work with our team to sort through the infinite possibilities of the moment we find ourselves in and make sure that we're keeping the main thing the main thing. Our leadership team behind me have been working for many days and weeks to come up with our agenda, along with our Senate colleagues in different subject matters. We have experts in just about every field, and those men and women have been working alongside of us for many weeks now. And we want to talk a little bit about our agenda, which you have a copy of, and I think in the handouts that were given out to you. Our legislative priorities rely on the tested foundational principles that make Georgia not just the best state in the country for businesses, but also for families. First, our agenda starts with the bolstering opportunity and the innovation in the Georgia economy. First, we'll be conducting a prudent income tax reform and tax credit review. The wheels of this process were set in motion last year when the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee were empowered to undertake a thorough review of all state tax credits, deductions, and exemptions. A report is due later this year, no later than December 1st. However, I anticipate that parallel discussions during the session, as we look at ways to provide the broader tax relief over time, will be done. I appreciate the work of our members, including Chairman Huffstetler of the Finance Committee, and of course, Chairman Blake Tillery of the Appropriations Committee, for their attention on this important issue. In the same vein, with high inflation and rapidly rising home values, taxpayers and homeowner relief initiatives being proposed by Governor Kemp are also important to this Senate body. It is prudent that we take into account how the implementation of these new programs will affect our goal of broader long-term tax reform, as lowering the income tax, which is a big priority of Lieutenant Governor Jones along with the Republican Senate. Additionally, on a subject that I've been working on directly, we will be laying the groundwork for the continued electrification of transportation in Georgia. Obviously, the major jobs announcements, along with the governor's vision for the EV industry in Georgia, drives the necessity for preparation and transition. Our EV study committee that was conducted over the summer and fall has done some great work over the last 8 months. I anticipate this culminating into legislation before the final gavel drops on sine die of this session. With so much economic opportunity abounding, we have to continue to cultivate an educated workforce that rises to meet its potential. One unique Senate-led effort will be our quest to improve literacy rates here in Georgia. Senator Billy Hickman has become a passionate champion for this effort, and we'll be working with Chairman Dixon of the Committee on Education and Youth to look closely at this issue. So much emphasis in recent years, and rightly so, has been put on increasing graduation rates as the benchmark for educational success. However, we need to make sure that graduation equals preparation. Having graduation and literacy rates in line with one another is a strategic imperative, and it's a priority of this body. Some of the renewed focus on literacy may be complemented by the implementation of the learning loss grants that were proposed earlier by Governor Kemp. We worked hard to limit the impact of COVID-19 on our students in Georgia, and we will continue to do so with the ongoing legislative efforts this year. But the reality is there is a gap that needs to be made up, and we are intent on getting it done for a generation of students who had their academic careers disrupted for over 2 years. One other legislative effort worth mentioning in cultivating our workforce will be SB 3. Senator John Albers, in coordination with the Lieutenant Governor's Office, is sponsoring this legislation, which seeks to look at a comprehensive review of degree requirements for state employees. When you look at the best state in the country to do business year after year, it would be easy just to say, mission accomplished, let's go home. But we have unfortunately seen that economic prosperity does not cure all ills. Increased crime is a quality of life issue that impacts hardworking, law-abiding families across this state. That is why I believe there is unanimity with the Senate, the House, and the governor on taking on swift action to get to the root of the crime problem in our state and across our nation. Coming into the session, we had already established common ground on several issues that we believe will lead to safer communities in our state's rural and urban areas. These include serious penalties for the recruitment of minors for gang activity, both mentioned as priorities of the governor and the lieutenant governor. Aggressive bail bond reform for violent offenses, also priority of the governor and the lieutenant governor. And just as important from a safety perspective, we will be backing enhanced school safety legislation that is a priority of Governor Kemp as well. In preparing for this press conference, I was speaking with Senators Robertson and Walker just days ago about this safety issue. I believe if you polled our caucus, regardless of what part of the state our members are from, they would put crime as the top of the list as constituent concerns. And you can be assured that we will be proactive and decisive in addressing this problem this session. Chairman Albers of the Public Safety Committee has worked diligently to enhance the safety of the state and will stay busy this session through other means and other pieces of legislation. Building on the theme of recognizing that economic opportunities for all may need our help in connecting to a better quality of life for all, we want to drill down further this session and make sure we are supporting the health and the well-being of working families and at-risk youth. Senator Larry Walker will be leading an effort to identify innovative ways to expand delivery of health care services for rural and underserved communities. Access to quality health care should not be diminished by your zip code, and we can utilize technology to increase access while reducing health care costs. This session, we have already signaled our intent to focus on helping our most vulnerable when the Lieutenant Governor created the Senate Committee on Children and Families, led by Chairwoman Kirkpatrick. As part of this overall effort, Chairman Tillery will be working for increased support for foster families and children in this year's budget. Finally, the Senate will continue building on past efforts to improve support for expecting mothers. Those efforts focused on maternal mortality and postnatal care, led by our former colleague, Senator Dean Burke, who is now implementing our work over at DCH. Now we will be working with the governor on additional benefits for income-eligible pregnant women as well. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge that these are the priorities of the majority party, but as the leaders of the representative body for all of Georgia, I hope you can see we take our stewardship role very seriously. Whether you are a job creator or a job seeker, a taxpayer or an innovator, a high-risk prenatal mom or at-risk youth, whether you live rural, urban, or suburban, we are working for you. Thank you for attending today's press conference. I'm happy to take any questions you may have at this time. Yes. I think the word oversight may not be the right word to use. I think this body will be looking for ways to ensure that the laws that are on the books today dealing with criminal activity would be enforced uniformly across the state, regardless of political boundaries, or whether you're in North Georgia, South Georgia, or in the cities around our state. And so I think that's the intent, is that we enforce the laws that are on the books. And if we need to enhance other laws to stiffen penalties to make sure criminals know that they're not welcome in our state, then I think that's the direction we'll be moving with that legislation. Would you repeat the question? I think that'll have to be discussed when the bill gets drafted, if there is a bill, and it'll be drafted and vetted properly in the Judiciary Committee by Chairman Strickland behind me, and I think there'll be plenty of time for discussion on that. Yes, sir. If you elaborate a little bit more on what typical statements you've done. I tell you, that is a great discussion with the passion that Senator Hickman has. I'd like for Senator Hickman to come up and talk about that because he spent a great deal of time on that topic, and that's one that I think you would be delighted to hear from him on. Senator, would you like to make a few comments?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We have worked real hard over last summer talking to superintendents and talking to teachers. And if you go back and look at the literacy rate, the average literacy rate in the state of Georgia in 2021 for third grade students reading on the third grade level for the whole state of Georgia is 43.49%. That means that you would normally think that you got some people, some areas of Georgia that are 70 to 80%. We don't have a RESA district in the state of Georgia that the third grade children reading on third grade level is more than 50%. So we can't ever develop a workforce going forward with all the jobs that this great body has put into place for the state of Georgia without children that can read. So what we want to do, we've been constantly looking at graduation rates. Every school system you look at has got graduation rates of 85, 90, and 95%. But when you really dig into it, the children can't read. So that's the passion behind this. We want to look at pre-K and K, where that's at. We want to look at whether teachers are being taught how to teach students how to read. We want to really dig back into the communities themselves, because what I've learned through this process is that people want to blame the teachers. But I'm married to retired teachers. You don't blame the teachers. You don't blame the principals. You don't blame the superintendents. But I do blame the superintendents a little bit because they haven't told our communities, that our children can't read. All they've told our communities is that we're graduating 85 and 90 and 95%. So that's where the passion comes in. So we're going, along with Senator Dixon's education committee, we're going to dig in. We're going to start having meetings beginning next Tuesday, and we'll go Tuesday, Wednesday, and then finalize and come back with a recommendation. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I would say I'm told there's over 200 tax credits, exemptions and deductions on the books today, and I couldn't sit here and tell you all of them. We have seen lists, and I would tell you that this committee, between the House Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee, will work diligently starting no later than May 1st, according to legislation we passed last year that is now in law. So that committee work has to begin no later than May 1st, and the final report will be due December 1st. I would tell you that every bill, every tax credit that's been passed here in recent memory should be looked at to look at the effectiveness. Was it necessary at the time? Has it basically done what the intent was? Has it created jobs? Has it created a return on the investment for the taxpayers of Georgia? And I'm sure there'll be some that probably have a higher ROI than others. And then at some point, the legislative process will have to decide whether to continue those exemptions, sunset them either immediately or into the future, or make other enhancements or modifications to them. So that's a pretty broad answer, but it's a pretty broad question as well. We do not have any specific ones that we want to identify at this time, other than that we would look at them all comprehensively. Yes, sir. That's a good question. It's one that we've struggled with in the process of the study committee. We're told by the industry experts that some manufacturers, such as General Motors, will no longer build a combustible engine after the year 2035. Well, you know, that's not far away from now. It's 12 years away. So if we're going to get rid of the combustible engine, that's the fuel tax that feeds the roads and bridge work over at the Department of Transportation, which is over $2 billion a year of revenue. So it's not impossible to think that in the future, it may be 20 or 30 years out, that we would lose a significant part of that motor fuel tax. And ultimately, we could end up losing it all. So we have to replace that motor fuel tax with some form of revenue stream for people who are using our public right of ways. And so if you're driving an electric car today, you're paying $200 per year for your tag, regardless of how many miles you travel in your vehicle. If you're driving a smaller car that's propelled by a 4-cylinder engine, you may get 40 miles to the gallon. You may only pay $100 per year in gasoline tax. Or if you're a commercial operator like a UPS or a FedEx or an Amazon delivery service, you may drive 50 to 60 or 70,000 miles per year and pay $2,000 to $3,000 in gasoline tax. And so that decision has to be made through the legislative process. Do we do a vehicle miles traveled policy? Do we allow for some kind of an annual fee based on weights of the vehicles? There's a lot of different options that are being considered. I'll tell you this, Georgia is at the front end of the discussion with GDOT and other state leaders around the nation looking at this same issue, and I don't think anyone's figured it out yet. So it's a tough one that we're going to have to spend a lot of time on. This year, I think we'll start out with some small framework legislation. First thing I think that you'll see legislatively is we will allow the companies like convenience stores to be able to sell electricity by the kilowatt. Currently, Georgia law does not allow the resale of electricity by the kilowatt. Only the utility companies are allowed to do that. I think that's a pretty simple fix. I believe all the parties have agreed to that solution, and we'll be moving forward with that legislation. A couple of other things will be the charging stations, where to put the charging stations. The Department of Transportation has already submitted a plan to Federal Highway. There's been a grant of $150 or so million that's been awarded to the state to deploy the charging stations around the state, essentially on right-of-ways and interstate routes. And I think you'll see those charging stations placed in strategic places not to exceed 50 miles apart. And so that's some of the infrastructure that we want to get in place quickly, get it ready for when the electric cars do come. Only 1% of the vehicles on the road in Georgia today are electric driven. The rest are still gasoline or diesel. Any other questions? I wouldn't bet on it. No, I'm kidding. The gambling issues have been around this building since I walked in here 12 years ago. I imagine they'll be here for many more years to come, but I believe there's a lot of discussion amongst different senators and House members about whether this year would be the year for sports betting. But it's not a priority of this caucus, but it is something that individual members are at liberty to introduce legislation at their freedom at any time. So I would say just keep your eyes open for that. Sure. The tax reform is essentially to lower the income tax on all Georgians, whether you're a company or an individual taxpayer. You know, we've lowered that rate already tremendously, but we'd love to see the day that it's completely eliminated in Georgia. Now, that's not an easy task either. If you had to replace 15 or 18 billion dollars of revenue, if you eliminated it all at one time, the elimination of tax credits would, increase some of that revenue, but I don't think that's the solution as well. So you're going to have to look for broader tax revenues to replace the income tax, but that is a decision that this body will make, and I think it's a goal that we all have as a Senate Republican majority, is to lower the income tax again next year and in the coming years ahead. School safety is a very sensitive issue that we're all near and dear. We're all family members. We're all parents, grandparents, and we would hate to see another incident happen in any of our schools anywhere in our nation. We need to do some things to increase safety, and I think there's an effort going forward to even put in some panic buttons in the school systems, in the classrooms, and I think that's the first start. But there's a lot of ideas being generated by the people behind me, and we'll be putting that legislation forward in the coming days and weeks ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job. All right.